Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. A regenerative neighborhood is one that goes beyond sustainable practices or maintaining the status quo to actually net positive impacts on all living systems, including humans and the land on which the humans are living.
Oh, interesting. Now we've talked about um, we talked about regenerative agriculture, and there's a group here that has a whole valley, and everything is around ag. But what you've added to it, which was interesting, was humans and buildings and infrastructure and all of that in community. Tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Sure. So our built environments have so many different elements, agriculture being one of them, our food
Yeah.
systems, where the food is grown, how it gets to us, where the soil in which it's grown is super important, especially in regenerative agriculture. But it's also integrating the materials of the homes that we're building, the source of energy, the source of water, how we dispose of our waste, and the cycles of all of these, how they interact or not. In conventional development, all of those elements are separate. Like the
Right.
waste goes to a sewage plant and far away, and it's treated with chemicals, and there's pollution potentially off of that, and
Right.
it goes away. But there's not really any away on planet Earth. Everything is connected, and so a regenerative paradigm, a regenerative approach, seeks to integrate all of those elements in the design process so that you have loops and systems that work together and partner with each other rather than stay in their own silos and potentially over the decades create issues.
As you were describing that, I started to I see everything in pictures, and I saw this huge system map of all of the various built systems and all of the things that all of that. And then you said the word loop, and I went, oh yeah, everything's connected to everything. And and I could imagine that the design plan for, because you're building a community there outside of Austin, could take up a whole wall. Am I wrong? Is it that big?
The design plan, yeah. Yeah, I have an organizational system that kind of holds the vastness of all of the details. Each sort of lens in itself, the architecture lens, the site planning lens, the civil
Right.
engineering lens, each of those disciplines itself has thousands and thousands of details. So integrating them is a humongous task, which is why it hasn't really been done before. And most of development and most of building parcels it out into chunks that one specialist focuses on that and does their job in that industry. And there's not as much crossover and collaboration and cooperation is necessary to create something new and different.
Well, that's exactly where I was going, because I'm thinking we've got some here in Santa Barbara, some amazing green building firms that are very, state of the art. We're the home of Earth Day, so on Earth Day every year, everybody comes out and we get examples of construction and energy generation and food, all of these things, and they're all there like they're silos. So it's like someone might say, okay, we're going to figure out solar for our house, or we're going to figure out how to grow our own food. We're going to figure out one piece of it. And that's just for my home. Who knows what my neighbors are doing? What you're saying is build this for an entire community. And I just keep thinking, as soon as I think of that big picture, I go from big to small really fast, and I start to freak out on the detail. And you seem super calm. So,
Yeah, it depends on the day. It's an exciting journey, and it's challenging. The more I learn about it, the more I understand why it's so challenging and difficult to do. It really involves an enormous level of cooperation, which we now have access to because of the modern society that we live in, with such abundance of information, ease of communication, sharing ideas. The regenerative movement is thriving and growing. And I was able to plug into it a couple of years ago and start learning about all these all these ideas and techniques and strategies and new creative things that are popping up all over the place, as you say. So the work is being done, and it's on the way for sure. It's definitely the next chapter of humans living on Earth. It kind of needs to be if we want to keep living in a way that feels good for humans and allows for the planet, which gives us our life to also thrive. And thankfully, we're moving in that direction.
Another image just came to my mind, which is almost like, is it fair to say you are it by definition becomes self-contained?
How do you mean?
It's almost like you're making and using everything that you're making and using.
The neighbor, yes, closed loop systems.
Right. So is it
Self-sustained.
fair to say the problem you're solving here is the same problem we need to solve if we're going to go colonize Mars?
Exactly. So it's
Okay.
taking that first Lego block. So maybe one Lego block could be viewed as a neighborhood. So that's like this, well, maybe a house is the smallest one, and then a collection of houses makes up a neighborhood, and a collection of neighborhoods makes a town, and a collection of towns eventually makes a city. And there's a lot of work being done on quote unquote smart cities. And those are all comprised of neighborhood units. And so we're working on that scale of it, of how do we create a neighborhood with, say, 150 Dunbar's number humans who are living together, and what does that look like in all of those details of technical detail in terms of the energy systems and infrastructure and water and all of that, but also in the cultural way of how do we live together in a more harmonious way that allows for the thriving of those people as well. And so we're also integrating some new societal kind of social elements as well.
Well, as I was reading more about what you're doing, you're paying attention to all aspects of it. It's fitness, wellness, and nutrition, right? The whole body thing is right. Fitness, wellness, and nutrition. So I think of whole community, it's fitness, wellness, and nutrition. It's kind of the same thing. And you're looking at all of that. So which adds another dimension. You actually could plug into this and theoretically not need to leave. Is that fair? I mean, you might want to leave.
Yeah. But... yeah, it's both and. So the idea is to create an eco-hood, an ecological neighborhood that has
eco-hood. Ooh, I want a t-shirt. I want a t-shirt.
I'll make you one.
Okay.
An eco-hood that's integrating most of what a person needs to live their daily life. So an organic farm on site, fruit orchards on site, educational programs for kids, a co-working hub so that you can walk through the neighborhood to the office and fulfill your work and your life's passion. A healthy cafe sourcing food from the organic farm so that you can have nourishing food and meals together in a communal, in an organic. So I'll say one thing about community also is that we're designing a neighborhood with keeping in mind that when people walk around, and it's easy to walk around, and they have an opportunity to bump into each other on a daily basis, then this thing called community naturally and organically arises, whereas we're not creating from the get-go a community. We're creating the design for humans to harmoniously interact in a way that might not happen in a typical subdivision or a city that hasn't really been laid out in a way that it's easy to walk around and it's beautiful and it feels good to be there and interact with the land and each other. So that's the one part of creating a self-sustained neighborhood. But then the idea is that there's a public facing aspect of it too, because creating just a bubble for a couple of people is not the goal. The goal is to create a center for collaboration and inspiration and innovation. So innovation requires cross-pollination of ideas and constant evolution. And that's also a tenet of regenerative paradigm, is it's a co-evolution of a partnership between different systems, humans and non-human systems, for example. So we want people to come and visit and come to events and workshops and the cafe and things like that, so that there's this flow in and out of that Lego block of a neighborhood that doesn't live in isolation, but is in connection. So there's constant connection forming within that neighborhood, but there's also connections happening between it and the broader community, which is the earth that we all share.
So it's kind of a, for lack of a better term, a model community at the same time. Yeah,
I'm interested in something that's replicable, not like a cookie cutter cut and paste, but some frameworks, some structures that are applicable in a lot of different environments and contexts. Instead of recreating the wheel from scratch every time, or creating a custom home every time, or designing systems from new every time you want to build a house or a neighborhood, we have the ingenuity to create some really good structures and systems that we can see work really well, constantly evolve them, and then replicate them in other places. And then as those places learn as well, you can share that information and have a system that's constantly improving itself.
So understanding, and we've just barely scratched this iceberg. I get a sense there's a tremendous amount of work, and it's not for the faint-hearted. and I'm wondering how many Avrils are there out in the world who are doing what you're doing?
That's a good question. I believe there are quite a few from the Regenerative Conferences that I've attended, and there's a global movement with folks in many different countries all over who are in the same path and attempting a similar vision. So there's probably less than a dozen real life examples of something like this in this way. There's all sorts of flavors and iterations of people living in a different way from the convention. But in this particular way, it's quite new. And there are a couple of examples around the world, but not too many.
It's still, we can count it on both hands. I'm not a young guy anymore, but grew up in the 60s, and we had communes and the communal living back then, which was different than what you're talking about now, because this is much more about the whole system. And we've learned so much in those 50 years since then, right? That it takes more than just, growing your own food and sewing your own clothes.
Yeah, and I did my rounds in that world for a while as I traveled for many years, and was able to notice the difference between, I grew up in New York City. So I grew up in a very
right in the middle of it. Yeah.
standard conventional concrete everywhere, smokestacks. And I was blessed to travel in many different contexts and, sleep out in the jungle and sleep on concrete floors in the middle of India, and just saw the variety of life that's available right now. So many different ways that we can grow food, that we can build houses, that we can structure our social lives and interact with each other. And then noticed that we tend to do it in kind of one way in the Western world, or at least in the US.
How's that?
And we're not fulfilling the full spectrum of creativity, of the human power of the human mind and heart, and efforts of collaboration to come up with really varied ways of doing things. And that has a lot of industries form for. There's a lot that goes into it, of why change is difficult at times, and why industries have certain standards and take a long time to shift, especially the building industry. And I think those are now more possible to shift as we have that information more available, maybe have the experience of the 60s and 70s and saw, okay, it was a good effort, but it didn't really work. Why didn't it work? Right. How can we combine some of that that intention of living more harmoniously with each other on the earth, but how can we do that in a way that in a modern context where it just makes sense and it's realistic?
You mentioned going to regenerative conferences, and I get a sense that this is, we're at the very leading edge of what will be, when we look back on it, a whole new movement. How do people go and find such a thing? I didn't even know there. I'm new to the game here, and I'm learning as we go. Just they Google regenerative conference and
Yeah,
something like that.
that'd probably do
there.
the trick. Yeah, there's probably not too many, maybe half a dozen or so
Right.
that I'm aware of. Most of them are online. There are a few in-person sort of regional ones happening. And there's an influx from the tech world. So there's a high interest and priority on tech integration, so that we are rolling with the modern times, and we're not trying to revert back to anything, but we're creating a future integrating all the benefits of technology. So in wastewater systems, in our energy production systems, basically humans need a couple of things to live, and high on that list is water, a way to deal with the wastewater, and energy, and a source of energy and materials for the homes that we build. So all of those are rapidly developing in the types of technologies that are available and will be available, that are coming online. For example, 3D printing. For a couple of years ago, it was still kind of a vague idea, and now it's there are people living in 3D built homes in the US right now, and their entire communities being built out of just that one type of technology. So we're accelerating the rate at which we are both changing and integrating new ways of doing things that we've done in the same kind of way, a wooden house or a cement house or a steel skyscraper. We're iterating on that much more quickly now, and therefore being able to come up with new ideas of how it's all going to fit together.
Avril, I am so glad you are working on this problem, because it is a big, big problem.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that.